300,000 Mongol horsemen pour into Hungary. 1 year later, only 100,000 ride back east. 200,000 dead in a single campaign. If true, it would be the most catastrophic military defeat in medieval history. But what if I told you the numbers are backwards? The real 300,000 weren't the invaders. They were the victims. This is the story of how medieval Europe's worst nightmare became a case study in how terror creates myths, how chroniclers, writing in apocalyptic fear, inflated numbers by factors of 10, and how the real disaster wasn't what happened to the Mongol army, but what the Mongol army did to 500,000 Hungarian civilians. By the time we're done, you'll understand why the famous numbers, 300,000 entering and 100,000 returning, they're not completely wrong. They're just counting the wrong bodies, and sometimes the wrong invasion entirely. The traditional story goes like this. In 1241, a massive Mongol horde invaded Hungary. Contemporary chronicles put their numbers at anywhere from 200,000 to 500,000 horsemen. They crushed the Hungarian royal army at the Battle of Mohi in a single afternoon, killing nearly every nobleman and bishop in the kingdom. They occupied Hungary for an entire year, systematically burning towns and slaughtering civilians. Then, in early 1242, they suddenly withdrew back to the eastern steppes. When they left, the story claims, only a fraction returned. Some versions say 100,000 out of 300,000. Others claim even worse attrition, 200,000 Mongols, dead or missing in a single campaign. It's a narrative that makes sense emotionally. It explains why the Mongols, after crushing Hungary so easily, never permanently occupied it. It gives Europe a consolation prize for one of its most humiliating military defeats. And it frames the withdrawal as a retreat, driven by unsustainable casualties. There's just one problem. Almost none of it is true. If you're finding this deep dive into medieval military history fascinating, consider subscribing for more content that separates historical myths from archaeological reality. To understand why these numbers are wrong, you need to understand how medieval chroniclers handled arithmetic. They couldn't count armies, not remotely accurately. They had no aerial reconnaissance, no systematic census methods, no logistical bureaucracy tracking troop movements. When a monk or bishop saw an enemy army approaching, he estimated based on fear and theological framing. Medieval chroniclers routinely inflated enemy numbers by factors of 5 to 10. Here's a perfect example. A German monk recorded the Polish-Lithuanian army at the Battle of Grunwald in 1410 as 5.1 million men. That's roughly the entire population of medieval Poland and Lithuania combined, including every infant, child, and elderly person. It's not a counting error, it's a category error. Medieval numbers for armies were rhetorical, not demographic. For the 1241 Mongol invasion, Hungarian chronicles claimed 500,000 invaders. The Persian chronicler Juvayni implied 200,000 by stating Hungarian defenders numbered 400,000, which would require an even larger attacking force. These weren't lies exactly. They were apocalypse literature. The Mongols were explicitly framed as Gog and Magog, the demonic armies prophesied to herald the end times in the Book of Revelation. Giving them apocalyptic numbers made theological sense. It explained how Christian kingdoms could lose to pagans. God was testing Europe, and the Mongols were his instrument of divine punishment. But if we want actual numbers, we need to look somewhere else entirely. The crucial source is Rashid al-Din, a Persian historian writing in the early 1300s. He served as vizier of the Ilkhanate, the Mongol successor state ruling Persia. And critically, he had direct access to the Altan Detta, the secret official chronicles of the Mongol royal family. Rashid al-Din states explicitly, the Western campaign into Central Europe deployed 40,000 Mongol horsemen. Not 300,000, not 200,000. 40,000 ethnic Mongol cavalry, organized in the standard Tumen decimal system of 10,000-man units. Now that's the core force. It doesn't include auxiliaries, conscripts from conquered Russian principalities, Turkic vassals, or Chinese siege engineers. When you add those support troops, modern military historians estimate the total combat effective force at 50,000 to 80,000 soldiers across all European fronts. The invasion operated on 3 fronts simultaneously. One column struck Poland to protect the northern flank and prevent reinforcements. Another swept through Transylvania to secure the south. The main force, under Batu Khan and the legendary General Subutai, drove straight into the heart of Hungary. At the decisive Battle of Mohi on April 11, 1241, modern estimates put Mongol strength at 20,000 to 30,000 men, facing a roughly similar-sized Hungarian force. That's a very long way from 300,000. So where did that number come from? And where did the myth of 200,000 Mongol deaths originate? The answer is both obvious and horrifying. They were counting the wrong casualties. Let's run the numbers on what a 300,000-man Mongol army would actually require. Each Mongol warrior campaigned with a string of 3 to 5 horses. This wasn't luxury or status display. It was operational necessity. Horses were rotated during long marches to prevent exhaustion. Mares provided milk, a primary food source on campaign. If one mount was injured or killed, the warrior remained mobile. And in battle, fresh horses meant tactical speed advantage. An army of 300,000 men would require at minimum 900,000 horses. More realistically, closer to 1.5 million animals. Now, those horses need to eat. A cavalry horse consumes roughly 12 kilograms of fodder per day. In early spring, before grass is fully grown, they need supplemental feeding. They also need 20 to 30 liters of water daily per animal. The Hungarian Great Plain, the Alfold, is large, but it's not Mongolia. It's roughly 1/20th the size of the Mongol homeland steppe. Modern ecological modelling by historian Denis Sinor calculated the maximum carrying capacity of the Hungarian plain for cavalry operations. Under optimal grazing conditions, the region could sustain approximately 68,000 to 107,000 cavalry horses. In early spring of 1241, conditions weren't optimal. The eyewitness account by Roger of Apulia explicitly notes that the Mongols deliberately preserved border regions for food and fodder before launching their invasion. This wasn't mercy or hesitation. It was calculated logistics. They knew the Hungarian interior couldn't support their army indefinitely. An army of 300,000 cavalry with over 1 million horses would have eaten the landscape bare within 2 weeks. They would have starved before ever reaching Mohi. The math doesn't just fail to work. It's physically impossible given the geography and season. To understand what actually happened at Mohi, you need to understand how catastrophically unprepared Hungary was. April 11th, 1241. The Hungarian Royal Army, numbering somewhere between 10,000 and 25,000 men, camps on the plain of Mohi, just west of the Sejau River. King Bela IV has managed to assemble this force despite a political crisis that borders on civil war. Just weeks earlier, a mob in the city of Pest murdered Khan Khotan, the leader of 40,000 Cuman refugees. The Cumans were Turkic nomads who had fled westward to escape Mongol persecution. They were skilled horse archers with direct experience fighting Mongol cavalry tactics. Bela had granted them asylum specifically to gain military allies. He even adopted the title King of Cumania to formalize the relationship. But the Cumans were nomadic pastoralists. Their herds trampled Hungarian crops. Their customs clashed with settled agricultural society. And as Mongol armies approached, conspiracy theories spread. Nobles accused the Cumans of being Mongol spies, advanced scouts sent to facilitate invasion. When the mob killed Khan Khotan, the Cumans declared war on Hungary. They rampaged southward, pillaging villages and destroying Hungarian military units attempting to mobilize. Then they fled to the Balkans. Hungary lost the only force in the kingdom with experience fighting Mongols on the eve of the decisive battle. What remained was a transitional military structure, caught between two doctrines and mastering neither. Light cavalry that resembled Hungary's Magyar ancestors, but lacked Mongol compound bow technology and tactical discipline. Heavy knights modelled after Western European warfare, but few in number and untested in massed cavalry combat. And a king whose nobles hated him. Bela had spent his reign trying to reclaim royal lands his father had donated to secure baronial loyalty. Many nobles refused to answer his mobilization call. Others delayed deliberately. The Hungarian army at Mohi represented perhaps half the kingdom's theoretical military strength. The other half stayed home, sulking. The Mongols, under operational command of General Subutai, needed to cross the Sajo River to attack the Hungarian camp. A single stone bridge provided the only easy passage across the swollen spring waters. On the night of April 10th, Mongol cavalry attempted a surprise crossing in darkness. A Hungarian slave escaped from the Mongol camp and warned King Bela of the night attack. Duke Koloman and Archbishop Ugrin Chak immediately led elite troops, including Knights Templar and crossbowmen, to defend the bridge. They caught the Mongol vanguard in the middle of the crossing. In the confined space of the bridge, Mongol light cavalry couldn't maneuver. They couldn't employ their signature tactic of feigned retreat and encirclement. They were packed shoulder to shoulder, trapped between the bridge railings, with Hungarian crossbowmen raining bolts from short range. Crossbow bolts, with their massive kinetic energy, could penetrate Mongol lamella armor. The Mongols took heavy casualties and were forced to retreat back across the river. The Hungarians, believing they had won a decisive victory, returned to camp to celebrate. They left only a small guard detachment at the bridge. It was a fatal mistake. They had won a tactical engagement, but misread the strategic situation entirely. The Mongols weren't defeated. They were adapting. At dawn on April 11th, the Mongols returned to the bridge, but not with cavalry. They rolled up 7 massive siege engines, stone throwers, traction trebuchets that were normally deployed against city walls during siege warfare. The Mongols bombarded the bridge with stones and naphtha pots, flaming projectiles that spread fire on impact. The psychological effect was immediate and devastating. Medieval armies expected siege artillery at fortifications, not in open field battles. The bridge guards, already exhausted from the night fighting, broke and fled. Batu Khan's cavalry force crossed the bridge in strength and engaged the Hungarian army, now fully roused and forming battle lines. The fighting was desperate and bloody. Hungarian heavy cavalry, armoured knights on large war horses, charged repeatedly. They pushed back hard. The Mongols took serious casualties. 30 of Batu's elite bodyguards, his Batars, were killed. A Mongol commander named Bakatu died in the fighting. Batu himself seriously contemplated retreat. The battle was not going according to plan, but while Batu pinned the Hungarians frontally, absorbing punishment and keeping them engaged, Subutai executed the decisive maneuver. He led a large force several miles downstream, beyond visual range of the main battle. The waters were too deep for cavalry to ford safely. So Subutai ordered his engineers to construct a pontoon bridge under combat conditions. This was sophisticated military engineering performed at speed under extreme pressure. The Mongols transported prefabricated bridge components and assembled them rapidly, a logistical capability that reflected their experience conquering fortified cities across Asia. Subutai's force crossed the river undetected and struck the Hungarian flank and rear. The Hungarian army, suddenly compressed between Batu's frontal assault and Subutai's flanking force, panicked. They retreated into their fortified wagon camp, heavy supply wagons that had been chained together in a circle to form a makeshift fortress. This defensive tactic, called a lager or wagon fort, was common in Central European warfare. It was effective against disorganized cavalry charges or infantry assault. Against Mongol siege artillery and psychological warfare, it became a death trap. The Mongols surrounded the wagon camp but didn't immediately assault it. Instead, they repositioned their 7 siege engines and began raining fire and stones onto the densely packed interior. Flaming arrows ignited tents. Naphtha pots spread liquid fire across wooden wagons. Stone projectiles crushed men huddled behind carts. The smoke alone was suffocating. Batu observed that the Hungarians were packed like cattle in narrow stalls. Then the Mongols deployed their signature tactic, one they had perfected over decades of warfare. The Golden Bridge principle derived from Sun Tzu's art of war. A surrounded enemy, with no hope of escape, fights to the death with maximum ferocity. But an enemy with an apparent escape route will abandon formation and flee, becoming vulnerable to pursuit and slaughter. The Mongols deliberately left a gap in their encirclement. A road west, toward the city of Pest, appeared open. Hungarian soldiers, seeing the opening, broke ranks and fled. They discarded heavy armor to run faster. They abandoned weapons. They scattered. The Mongol light cavalry, the most mobile force in medieval warfare, pursued them relentlessly for days. Thomas of Split, a contemporary chronicler, recorded that the roads were strewn with so many corpses that the ground had become dyed red from their blood. Bodies were stacked so thick they formed obstacles. Hungarian casualties approached 100% of the field army. 2 archbishops died. 3 bishops died. The master of the Knights Templar died. Most of the kingdom's nobility perished in the rout. King Bela IV barely escaped. He fled toward the Dalmatian coast with Mongol cavalry pursuing him for weeks. He eventually took refuge in Klis Fortress, a hilltop castle the Mongols couldn't quickly siege. The Hungarian army ceased to exist as an organized military force. So, if the Hungarians were annihilated, what about Mongol losses? This is where the 200,000 dead myth supposedly comes from. We know the Mongols took substantial casualties at Mohi. 30 elite Batars dead. Commander Bakatu killed. Significant losses in the bridge fighting and the main engagement. In 1246, 5 years after the invasion, Franciscan friar John of Plano Carpini travelled to the Mongol court on a papal diplomatic mission. He witnessed and recorded in his travel account a large cemetery in Russia exclusively for Mongol troops killed in the campaign against Hungary. The Mongols built a dedicated cemetery for their Hungarian campaign dead. That's significant. Steppe nomads didn't typically construct permanent cemeteries unless the casualties were substantial enough to warrant commemoration. But substantial is not the same as catastrophic. It doesn't mean 200,000 dead. For a force of 20,000 to 30,000 at Mohi, with perhaps 50,000 to 80,000 total in Hungary, substantial likely means hundreds to several thousand casualties. Enough to hurt, enough to remember, not enough to cripple operations. The Mongols spent the next year occupying Hungary. They systematically pillaged the countryside. They destroyed settlements. They besieged fortified towns. This doesn't sound like an army that lost 2/3 of its strength. So where does the 200,000 figure actually come from? The truth is both obvious and heartbreaking. The 300,000 weren't Mongol invaders. They were Hungarian victims. The Mongols spent 12 months, from April 1241 to spring 1242, systematically devastating Hungary. And modern archaeology has confirmed the medieval chronicles weren't exaggerating the horror. Demographic. Historians, using multiple data sources, estimate Hungary lost 300,000 to 500,000 civilians during the invasion and occupation. That represents 15 to 25% of the total population. In some regions of the Great Plain, the Alfold, population loss reached 60 to 100%. Entire districts were depopulated. The evidence comes from multiple sources. Excavations since the late 1990s, accelerated by highway construction projects, have uncovered mass graves across the invasion route. At Bugac-Aranamonastor Monastery, archaeologists have uncovered 26 bodies of women and children killed by Mongol forces. Some were executed in rows while seated or crouching, suggesting methodical massacre rather than combat casualties. A massive deposit of animal bones at the site, containing thousands of animals both domestic and wild, young and old, indicates emergency provisioning for a Mongol force that wintered at the location. It's the first archaeological identification of a Mongol winter encampment in Hungary. Coin hoards provide another line of evidence. The number of coin hoards buried in 1241 to 42 is considerably higher than in preceding or following decades, and many were never recovered, which indicates their owners died before they could return. At Kiskun archaeologists found 250 silver coins buried with the charred remains of murdered children. At Segled, a mother and 2 children died while hiding in an oven, their treasure buried beside them. Perhaps most disturbing, bones showing deliberate flesh scraping with sharp tools have confirmed chronicle claims of widespread cannibalism during the famine that followed the invasion. These accounts were long dismissed by historians as rhetorical exaggeration or anti-Mongol propaganda. Forensic archaeology has vindicated them. Master Rogerius of Torre Maggiore survived the invasion by hiding in forests and marshes. His chronicle, Carmen Miserabile, The Song of Lament, provides a first-hand account of Mongol occupation tactics. The Mongols employed calculated psychological warfare and deception. They would issue written proclamations, stamped with stolen royal seals, ordering peasants to return to their villages to harvest the crops. The proclamations promised safety and royal protection. Peasants, desperate and trusting official documents, returned and gathered the harvest. This solved the Mongols' logistical food problem for occupying forces and their massive horse herds. Once the harvest was secured, the peasants were slaughtered. Rogerius described survival as purely a function of geography. Those who fled to deep forests, impassable marshes, or high mountain fortresses had a chance. Those who remained in the open plains or trusted wooden palisade defenses were doomed. He described a landscape where church towers were way signs through a completely desolated wasteland. Villages were ash, fields were trampled, bodies lay unburied because there weren't enough survivors to bury the dead. This was the real disaster. Not 200,000 Mongol soldiers dying in combat, 300,000 to 500,000 Hungarian civilians murdered, starved, or driven into exile during a year-long occupation. In early 1242, despite total military dominance and control of most Hungarian territory, the Mongols suddenly withdrew. They rode back east to the Pontic steppes. They never returned to occupy Hungary permanently. This withdrawal is one of history's great counterfactual questions. What if they had stayed? The traditional explanation is political. Ogedei Khan, the great Khan in distant Mongolia, died on December 11, 1241. News of his death supposedly compelled Batu Khan to return for the Kurultai, the election assembly to choose a new great Khan. Modern scholarship has largely rejected this explanation. The timeline doesn't work. For a messenger to travel 6,000 kilometers in winter from Mongolia to Hungary, deliver news, and influence the withdrawal decision by early spring 1242 requires implausibly fast communication. Medieval courier speeds, even using the Mongol relay system, couldn't achieve it. More critically, Rashid al-Din explicitly states in his chronicle that Batu decided to withdraw before learning of Ogedei's death, and Batu never actually returned to Mongolia. He stopped at the Volga River and established his own independent Khanate, the Golden Horde. If returning for the Kurultai was his motivation, why did he stop halfway? Current scholarship points to multiple causes working together. First, environmental collapse. Tree ring analysis, dendrochronology, shows sharp cooling and exceptional wetness in early 1242. The Hungarian plain, which has a naturally high water table, turned into a swamp. Pastureland for the vast Mongol horse herds disappeared. Cavalry, mobility, the foundation of Mongol warfare, became impractical. The wet conditions also damaged composite bows, which were constructed using horn, wood, and animal glue. Moisture weakened the glue bonds, and disease spread rapidly among horse herds in muddy conditions. Second, unexpected military resistance. While the Mongols crushed field armies easily, they struggled against stone fortifications. Towns with stone citadels successfully resisted siege. Esztergom's citadel held out. Székesfehérvár, protected by natural marshes, resisted. The hilltop fortress of Klis in Croatia, where King Bela took refuge, could not be quickly taken. Approximately 80 fortified locations held out during the entire occupation. The Mongols never fully pacified the kingdom. Every castle that resisted tied down troops and supplies. Third, logistical exhaustion. The devastation the Mongols themselves created made prolonged occupation impractical. Historian Peter Jackson calls this catastrophic success. They had destroyed the agricultural infrastructure and population needed to sustain their army long term. Fourth, significant casualties. While not catastrophic, the losses at Mohi and during the year-long occupation were serious enough to warrant that dedicated cemetery. General Subutai was nearly 70 years old. He had conquered more territory than any general in history. He was tired. The campaign had achieved its primary objective, destroying the Cumans who had fled to Hungary and punishing their protectors. From a Mongol strategic perspective, the mission was complete. But the Mongols made one thing absolutely clear. They intended to return. King Bela IV returned to a kingdom in ruins, cities burned, villages abandoned, perhaps a quarter of the population dead, enslaved, or fled as refugees. The royal army destroyed. He could have given up. Instead, he initiated the most comprehensive military reform program in medieval Hungarian history. Bela understood the fundamental lesson of Mohi. The age of earthwork fortifications was over. Mongol mobility and siege artillery could overcome traditional wooden palisades and earth berms. Hungary needed stone. Before 1241, Hungary possessed roughly 10 stone fortifications. Most were concentrated along the Austrian border, defending against Western threats, not Eastern ones. The kingdom's defensive doctrine explicitly prohibited nobles from building private castles, a policy designed to prevent oligarchical power centers from challenging royal authority. Bela abandoned that doctrine entirely. He incentivized nobility to build stone castles by granting tax exemptions, land donations, and legal privileges for fortress construction. The response was extraordinary. Within 10 years, 44 new stone castles rose across Hungary. By 1300, the number reached 147 to 172 fortresses, depending on how you count fortified manor houses. He reformed the military structure. The light cavalry that had failed at Mohi was supplemented with heavy armoured knights and large numbers of crossbowmen. He had witnessed firsthand how effective crossbows were during the bridge fight. Hungarian crossbow bolts could penetrate Mongol armour at ranges where traditional archery failed. He recalled the Cumans. Despite the disaster of their departure, they represented the only European force with tactical experience fighting Mongol cavalry. He granted them land, integrated them into Hungarian military structure, and rebuilt the alliance. He requested 1,000 Venetian crossbowmen from the Pope, explaining he needed experienced professional soldiers to train Hungarian forces. Bela earned the epithet Second Founder of the Nation for this transformation, and in 1285 his reforms were tested. In winter of 1285, 43 years after the first invasion, the Golden Horde invaded Hungary again. The force was led by Nogai Khan and Talabuga, both confident commanders who expected to replicate 1241's easy victory. They found a completely different kingdom. The Hungarians refused to give battle in the open field. There would be no second Mohi. Instead, Hungarian forces retreated into their stone castles and implemented scorched earth tactics. Every village along the invasion routes was evacuated. All food supplies were removed or destroyed. The population withdrew behind stone walls. The Mongols, expecting to live off the land exactly as they had in 1241, found nothing. The devastated plains from the first invasion still hadn't fully recovered. Now, with active Hungarian denial operations, there was literally nothing to feed the massive Mongol horse herds. Talabuga's column, invading through the Carpathian mountain passes, was devastated not by Hungarian swords, but by simple starvation. The stone castles that studded the landscape couldn't be quickly seized. The Mongols lacked the logistical train to conduct prolonged sieges in a country they themselves had stripped bare decades earlier. The Galician-Volhynian Chronicle, a Russ's primary source, claims Talabuga lost 100,000 men during the campaign. Like all medieval numbers, this figure is inflated for rhetorical effect. But it signifies the total destruction of his force as an effective combat unit. As the weakened, starving Mongols retreated back through the Carpathian passes, they were ambushed by the Cerkulis. These were Transylvanian border guards, militarized communities who knew every mountain path and forest trail. The Mongols were systematically destroyed during the retreat. The few survivors who made it back to the Pontic steppes arrived on foot, having been forced to eat their horses to survive. This was the real 100,000 who never returned. Not from the invasion everyone remembers, but from the return invasion that almost nobody discusses. So let's return to the numbers in the title. 300,000 Mongols enter Hungary, 100,000 return. As literal arithmetic describing the 1241 invasion, it's completely wrong. 50,000 to 80,000 Mongols invaded across all fronts. Casualties were substantial, but numbered in the hundreds or low thousands, not 200,000. But as emotional truth, the numbers capture something real. 300,000 people died during the Mongol invasions of Hungary, but they weren't the invaders. They were Hungarian civilians, slaughtered systematically during the 1241 occupation. 15 to 25% of the population, confirmed by archaeological mass graves, coin hoards that were never recovered, and forensic evidence of post-invasion famine cannibalism. 100,000 failed to return from a Mongol invasion of Hungary. But not in 1241, in 1285, when a Mongol army expecting an easy repeat victory instead starved to death in a transformed kingdom and was destroyed during its retreat through mountain passes. The numbers aren't exactly right. Medieval chroniclers couldn't count accurately, but they captured the scale of trauma and the arc of reversal. The story of the Mongol invasions of Hungary is usually told as a tale of barbarian triumph. The unstoppable horde that crushed European chivalry, devastated a kingdom, and only withdrew because of accidents like a Khan dying in distant Mongolia. That framing is both true and incomplete. The complete story is about adaptation under existential threat. Hungary in 1241 was a kingdom paralyzed by internal political dysfunction. Its defenses were obsolete. Its army was caught between two military doctrines and mastered neither. Its only force with anti-Mongol experience murdered its own allies on the eve of battle. The disaster at Mohi was absolutely real. The destruction of the field army was total. The death toll of 300,000 to 500,000 civilians was catastrophic, proportionally exceeding Hungary's losses in World War II. But the disaster created the conditions for transformation. Within one generation, Hungary rebuilt itself specifically to counter the Mongol threat. Stone replaced earth. Strategic defense in depth replaced decisive battle. Heavy cavalry and crossbowmen supplemented light cavalry. Military reforms were grounded in the specific tactical lessons of Mohi. Crossbows work against Mongol armor. Stone walls resist Mongol artillery. Scorched earth defeats Mongol logistics. When the Mongols returned in 1285, expecting another Mohi, they found a kingdom that had weaponized its own trauma into doctrine. The real story isn't about inflated medieval numbers. It's about the reversal those numbers accidentally capture. From devastating invasion to successful defense. From 300,000 victims to 100,000 starving invaders destroyed in retreat. Medieval chroniclers couldn't count armies. They lacked the tools and methodology. But they understood something modern historians sometimes miss when we focus purely on accuracy. Numbers aren't just data. They're emotional architecture. They're how societies process collective trauma and communicate the scale of transformation. When you survive an invasion that kills a quarter of your population, When you watch your kingdom burn, when you flee as a refugee through forests subsisting on roots and berries, the numbers you write down aren't meant to be census data. They're meant to communicate the magnitude of what you survived and what you became in response. The disaster at Mohi didn't destroy Hungary. It rebuilt it. The invasion that killed 300,000 civilians produced a kingdom that could kill, or more accurately starve, 100,000 invaders 43 years later. That's the real meaning of the arithmetic. Not the literal count, but the trajectory it describes. From victim to survivor to defender. The numbers are wrong, but the story they tell is true.